Welcome to Journeys with the No Schedule Man, exploring authentic stories of personal growth and lessons learned from people living true to themselves with creativity, passion, and purpose. For all past episodes, subscribe on iTunes or visit noscheduleman.com. And please connect, share, and contribute with a comment, rating, or review. And now, here's your host, the No Schedule Man, Kevin Bulmer.
I've been known to struggle with reality, not that it is any real mystery.
The question is, how do we get from here to there? Or in other words, how can we get from where we are to what we think just maybe could be possible? Welcome. I'm Kevin Bulmer. If you're hearing this, you have stumbled across a living, breathing, constantly evolving attempt to address that question. It took me some time to realize, but I eventually clued in that this very podcast is indicative of both each guest and their story and the much larger context to which we all contribute. It's a journey. The destination we choose is what gets us moving forward, but it's the motion that gives us life. The steps, the stops, the rapids, the rest, the roadblocks, the rejoicing, the doing and experiencing things we never imagined we could or would, and the perfect hindsight with which we look back and wonder what we possibly could have been thinking of at the time. Those are maybe some of the missteps and mistakes that we look back on. But through all of that, what is it that keeps us moving forward? Well, I think that part of it, at least, is possibility. But there also has to be a sense of enjoyment, an honoring of the process itself all along the way. In other words, getting to the top of the mountain is great. It needs to be there to help us define a path and choose a direction. But it's the planning and execution of the trip, the exhilaration of the challenge, the heartbreak of the setbacks, and the triumph of their solutions. That's what we hold on to. That's where we grow. And in fact, it seems to me that where we really dance with life is when we get to the point where we realize that there is really no one definitive mountaintop. There's no there. The very essence of what makes a person want to climb a mountain to begin with means that by the time they're partway up, they'll have already identified yet another mountain that awaits them. Now, this isn't to be frowned upon. It's to be celebrated. That's growth and growth mindset. And once we discover that and discover that we can never truly be done, well, then you tend to value each individual step along the way. That seems kind of paradoxical, and it's something I wish I'd learned 30 years ago, but finally feel like I'm on to now. It is a journey. Mine, yours, humanity's. So, where's it taking us? Well, none of us really know for sure, but we're here now. This moment, this step is something that we can take together, sharing with and supporting each other along the way. So up until this week, this program has been called the No Schedule Man Podcast. I've never really been completely satisfied with that name. I called it that because back when I started doing this, I thought that was a slightly more interesting way of saying the Kevin Bulmer Show. Now, there definitely is a meaning behind it, a mythology about the phrase No Schedule Man, which first were lyrics to a song, then a CD title, later, of course, a podcast name, then a keynote speech and workshop, and basically, for me, it's become a way of life. But as far as letting people know what the podcast was actually about, I've never really felt it's done a very good job. But here's the thing, and I want to share this with you as something to keep in mind in case there's something creative that you're still thinking about, but you're trying to figure out, have all the answers before you jump into the pool. In relation to the podcast, I'm going to let you know, not one guest has ever asked me what the name means. Not one. And you know what else? I've never been asked this by a guest. No one has ever asked me how many people listen to the show. No, nobody's ever appeared on the program has ever asked me that. I think that's real interesting, and I thought I would share that with you so that you can evaluate what is it that you're thinking of doing, but you're worried about who's going to judge you. My suggestion, just get started. Back to the name. I could make the argument that this new name I've got now, Journeys with the No Schedule Man, is not a whole lot better than the original from a marketing perspective. So in terms of finding an immediate audience, I realized I'd probably be better off using some marketing gimmick of naming it, the how-to personal growth show, or top 5 ways to improve your life, or maybe I'd call it the Positive Thought Weekly Podcast or the Personal Development Hour. But that just doesn't appeal to me. Anybody can come up with a headline, a title, or marketing gimmick, but I think not everybody is willing to lead a search, be the curator and the caretaker of so many people's most personal stories, to raise their hand and ask the question that a lot of people might be thinking, but very few of us actually want to ask or are willing to ask, and to serve as a kind of quasi-Sherpa along the way for any of us who are interested in connecting with who we really are and discovering what's possible when we identify, embrace, and begin to live with a sense of real authenticity. Well, I've found out I am. For better or for worse, I've learned that that's what appeals to me. I don't have all the answers. I just need to be willing to ask the questions and then be open enough to discovering the answers regardless of what I thought they might have been before I set out. So it's with all that in mind, I'm proud to say that the name and the artwork of this show has now been updated to better reflect what I feel it is, a journey. So we will go forward, for the next while anyway, as Journeys with the No Schedule Man. And before we get to the first of these special edition episodes in the conversation, the featured conversation, I thought that since every guest shares something really personal, I thought I should also share some things that are really personal, as my life has changed immeasurably since I began moving forward in my journey with life, and particularly with this show. When I began this podcast, I did so really not because I had an end in mind, a mountaintop, but just because I felt driven to do it. So again, I'm sharing in case you've got something that you're evaluating and you're wondering whether or not to get off the sidelines and try. I decided that I would ignore most of my natural instincts and just allow myself to jump into the pool and figure out why I was there and what I was doing in the pool later. In other words, I decided I would let the way show itself to me, and I had to ignore the anxiety of a lot of different voices that would be constantly asking me who my core audience was, what my avatar was, what my niche is, what my micro niche is. I didn't know. I still only have a vague idea of all of that. But here's the thing. I'm in the game. And I've created something that has changed my life and contributed to the lives of a lot of other people in a positive way. I know this to be true because they've told me so. At the time that I'm recording this, I've made what I consider to be a pretty significant life change. I've just left a job I've had for the last 5.5 years so that I can focus 100% of my time and attention on creating and contributing through my own business with Kevin Bulmer Enterprises, doing workshops, seminars, speaking, coaching, writing, and the videos that I make, and of course this podcast. And when I started this podcast, I was not intending for that change to be made, the career change, not at all. But as you're going to hear from different people that teach personal development and how things like the law of attraction works, when you begin to act and work in alignment with your true self and your core values, really interesting, magical things begin to happen. And other interesting and magical people get put across your path when you're committed to moving forward in an authentic fashion. So I don't know what lies ahead, although I certainly have a vision of the projects and pursuits that will drive me forward, and I feel comfortable in knowing that the reality of how it will turn out will probably look something a lot different from what I'm imagining now. And that's not only okay, that's probably going to be awesome. But looking back, I can see it's absolutely obvious that there have been certain people and occurrences that have helped both push and pull me up the mountain and change the course of my journey along the way. So while I work to get this name switched over for this podcast, which I think is a pretty big project when I consider everything that's been created that the name and logo are a part of, and as I also embark to get recharged a bit over this summer, to move forward with the next phase of my life, I thought this would be an appropriate time to revisit a few conversations that hindsight now shows me have been absolutely pivotal in my development, and to share with you a bit of the story of each and why I feel they've been such a help. So over the next few weeks, and I know I've been talking a lot here before the conversation, but over the next few weeks, I really hope that you'll stick with me, join me in exploring these episodes and also reflecting on your own journey, both where you've been and where you wish to go. I'm going to ask you right now, are you taking the time to recognize and appreciate the signs that you've been getting along the road that has led you to where you are now? I think that most of us have very little trouble in naming the things that we don't care for as much. But what about the act of appreciating the good stuff? That's what I'm here to do with the first 4 weeks of what will now be known as Journeys with the No Schedule Man. So the first of these 4 special edition episodes could only have been the conversation I had with David Ciccarelli, who is the founder and CEO of Voices.com, which is an industry-leading company that connects businesses with professional voice talent. Voices.com is used by radio and television stations, advertising agencies, and a wide variety of Fortune 500 companies who rely on David and his team to be able to help them search for, audition, and hire voice talent. Though they're based in my hometown of London, Ontario, Canada, Voices.com serves businesses and voice talent from all over the world. And at the time of this recording, in the summer of 2017, Voices.com had just recently received an $18 million investment to help them expand and continue to grow and thrive and employ even more people and expand the vision. Now, I'd like you to keep that context in mind as you hear what David shares about how it all started and the journey to get to where they are today. I also want to note that I was absolutely thrilled one day a few weeks ago when I received a personal email from David to tell me about the news of that investment and the continued growth of Voices.com. I was just thrilled for him. When I was trying to get my legs underneath me with this podcast, and I was only at the time doing an episode every other week, I had reached out to David to see if he'd be willing to join me, as he and I had met a few years ago, and I think he'd tell you too that we enjoyed each other's company. I certainly appreciated him and his time. After we created what was, at the time, episode 10 of the podcast, I remember posting on social media a message that said something like, at some point I'm going to look back and identify this as the episode where the podcast found its legs. That's what I said about episode 10 with David at the time. Now, looking back, I can confirm that's exactly what happened. After I talked to David, I gained more confidence through the perspective of honoring the journey and just doing the work, which is a theme that developed over the next several episodes well over a year ago. I began to connect with people well outside my immediate circle, and within weeks of talking to David, I had connected with people on 3 other continents and began to realize that the podcast could be something much more than I had imagined it would be when I started. Now, what you'll hear in David's story is much the same. What David gave us was a very clear, relaxed, and down-to-earth, yet I think fascinating account of how a guy from little old London, Ontario, Canada starts out with something all on his own, and then, over a period of time and through consistent effort, vision, and resourcefulness, grows the business into something of a global scale. I've gone back and I've listened to this conversation again several times. It gives me strength and hope in thinking about my own journey, my goals, dreams, projects, and processes. I think it's really easy to forget that no matter how much we care to view people as successful or not, no matter what they've done in business or in life, they're just people. They're just human beings. Things are done by people, taking action one step at a time in a journey. Now, David, in my opinion and experience, is one of the good ones. So I encourage you, if you have anything in your life that you're looking to improve or achieve, a possibility you're ready to pursue, listen to what David has to share and consider your own desires and journey along the way. You're going to see that it is a matter of simply doing the best with where you are and continuing to move forward. That's what he's been doing with Voices.com. That's what I'm doing with this podcast and my life and career in general. That's what you're likely doing in some area of your life if you're at all interested in listening to a podcast like this. And so with that in mind, I welcome you to Journeys with the No Schedule Man, and thank you for your presence as we all go up the mountain together. Here now is the story behind Voices.com with its founder, David Ciccarelli. We started by me asking him what his initial aspirations were and what held his interest way back at the beginning when he was just a kid.
Well, I wanted to be a pilot. It started there.
Really?
Yeah. Always enjoyed airplanes. I drew lots of airplanes. And I remember I had this one binder full of, not just the planes, but I would draw kind of the branding, the colors on the tail wing, right? And they always had their logos there. So I ended up finding this one book from the bookstore that it was like the complete encyclopedia of every airline that ever existed. And it had all the color. I just thought that was amazing. So I wanted to be a pilot. After that kind of moved into maybe something engineering, architectural. Played a lot of Legos as a kid. In fact, one of our family trips was over to Europe, and we visited Denmark. And that's the headquarters of Legoland. There it wasn't just kind of the little Lego sets and kits that you kind of put together. You might have gotten at Christmas time, but instead they were like 9 foot tall, Kennedy Space Station kind of shuttles, and almost like full size cities. They were like mini cities. So I always I enjoyed city planning and architecture, and in some ways, speaking of kind of your childhood aspirations playing out, I'd like to think that mine did as well, and what we're building here and at Voices is really building a company, and there's a lot of design and thought process that needs to go into how you lay out the office, to design systems and kind of put all these pieces together. So I'd like to think that I'm still on that same path.
It's interesting to hear you talking about a 9-foot space shuttle, and the word that's coming to my mind while you're talking about some of that stuff that I also see as it relates to Voices.com is scale. And when you're talking about models and drawing and something like that, it seems to be sort of following you around. But I'm curious, just to go back to the airplanes. Why airplanes? What was it that interested you about flying at that time?
Maybe it was as close to time travel as you could get. The fact that you could compress time and space by being in the sky, and the whole notion of visiting new cultures, new lands, seeing new sights, meeting new people. I think that was always really interesting to me. Again, growing up, we didn't have a cottage or another kind of summer house or any particular vacation spot. Instead, I remember this, Mom and Dad sitting down the kids and asking, if we could, would we rather buy a cottage? That was something that they were maybe considering, and it would be the same place that we went to every summer and spend our summers there, or would we rather take trips and travel? And all of us were like, yeah, let's go on some trips. Hey, our friends have camps and cottages. If we want to go there, we can go there. We were, we felt we kind of had that as an option already, but so few people traveled, and we just, really kind of seized that. And, we were fortunate enough to visit Europe a number of times, and long road trips throughout the U.S., and literally driving from Thunder Bay, Ontario, which is the tip of Lake Superior, all the way to California and up the coast and back through Canada. And that was like a 4 or 5 week trip in the summer. Those kind of things, like extreme traveling to a degree.
Brave parents.
Absolutely.
Doing that.
Yeah.
You've got siblings?
I have a brother and a sister as well.
And you were I can remember my sisters and I was usually squashed in the middle. I think maybe I've tried to block it from my memory in the old, the Griswold family station wagon.
Right.
Were you all of an age where you could travel together for a time?
Oh yeah, of course. I'm the youngest, and we had one of those even before the minivans. There were these big kind of caravan type, almost quasi buses, if you will.
Yep.
But we had one of those, and so there's the 5 of us with all the camping gear, and We weren't staying in hotels. It was campgrounds, and we just kind of plotted that next spot. I'm convinced there wasn't exactly a plan other than, let's get to the coast and then drive up the coast. But no, I mean, obviously great memories from that. And so I had my spot. And we played the license plate game, actually, which was to spot new license plates from different states and provinces from the oncoming traffic. And every 10th one kind of, won a prize, like a chocolate bar or something like that. But I was always keen to kind of get to the 10th one. But, of course, my brother would suddenly wake up when it was like number 9 or number 10 or 19 and on to the 20th, and he would claim the prize right at the end. But I would always have to remind him, like, you got to play the game along the way, get all those, name those plates and name those states and provinces before you can claim the prize. But no, it was good fun. So we actually still play the license plate game in our family now.
We didn't have any prizes, but I remember going on family trips and I would try to touch the plates of different states and stuff like that.
Wow. Okay. Well,
sounds kind of silly, but it's in the same.
You have to be close to them to do that.
Well, I didn't typically look for oncoming traffic.
No.
I remember a lot of Bob Evans parking lots and
Right.
things like that. But it's funny to hear you say that. So when you're thinking about traveling to new places and architecture and all of the other things that appeal to you about what you just described, you're a school-age kid at this point, right? So what do you remember of the time when you're transitioning in through high school and post-secondary, and what were your focuses at those times?
Well, I played in a band. Mom...
Tuba?
No, I played trumpet. I should have been playing drums the whole time. See, Mom put me through piano lessons. I think she always wanted to have a piano in the house. And then when she got the piano, she realized she needed a piano player. And I became the piano player. So she put me through lessons. I went through the music conservatory for 12, 13 years. And ended up writing my own songs. And so when it came time to... and then in high school, I think I don't know if there was anger issues or whatnot, or maybe it was just teenage frustration. She said, look, you're either getting a punching bag or a drum kit. So you take your pick. And I'm like, all right, drum kit it is. So got a drum kit. I felt that was kind of in line with the music nature, and played drums and keys and throughout high school and in bands and so forth. And when it was time to graduate, actually came across a specialized school, one that's here in London, Ontario, called the Ontario Institute of Audio Recording Technology. So this was a specialized, dedicated program raising up and teaching aspiring, sound and music professionals on how to be audio engineers. The guys and girls that sit on the other side of the recording studio glass that are recording and producing audio content. Most of it, of course, makes sense that it would be music, but learn that there's music for movies and music nowadays. Obviously, there's a variety of kind of new media that it takes shape. So that was the path I went. I never actually went to kind of a traditional college or university, if you will, but I think it was the right one.
So when you were doing that program, as best as you can recollect, what were you thinking was the way through, where you were going to go, or what you were hoping to do with those skills that you were learning?
Well, I wanted to start a studio. I didn't know what that kind of looked like until I was through the school. There were other career opportunities that were interesting. So I could have worked at another studio, maybe the CBC or CTV. Those are kind of aspirations of some of the fellow students. There was even an opportunity to be kind of the sound guy, if you will, on cruise ships. They had some number of leads and number of students who had kind of done that. But my heart was set on kind of that entrepreneurial path. I just wanted to build a small studio myself. And in fact, this was in the year 2000, which was the first year that reality TV was a brand new concept, and it was the first year that Survivor was coming online. And I thought, wow, that's really interesting. How is the guy doing sound remotely in the outback of Australia? And there ended up finding these threads online of this fellow kind of describing that he has this professional grade remote recording studio using all the latest technology, and he was just running it off of what was then the first Apple laptop called the Wall Street. It was the first Apple laptop that they came out with. And so my curiosity was piqued, and literally wrote down the list of all the equipment that this fellow was using, and pitched the idea to to my parents of saying, hey, I think after graduating I want to start up a studio and have this mobile recording studio. And they were really supportive. They thought it was a great idea. I think they saw that I was entrepreneurial, and there's lots of stories around that growing up as well too. But I ended up securing a small loan, which my dad co-signed for, which is likely the only way I got it. But it was enough to kind of cobble together that first recording studio, and I did remote audio recording on a laptop of bands, music groups, kind of in practice rooms, and I would go to the musician's place and record on site there, and then come back to my place and mix it down, and that's kind of how I figured out that I wanted to both be an entrepreneur and apply the skills and knowledge that I had for this passion of audio.
I find myself wanting to take a quick diversion and just ask you out of sheer curiosity if you're a Star Wars guy.
Yeah, we watch Star Wars for sure. In fact, actually, my son, who's now 12, he's really into this kind of superhero bent, which before was Lord of the Rings, and then it was Star Wars. And now we're on to various kind of Marvel characters.
There's a reason why I'm asking you, and that's
that?
Well, because of I get the sense that you're probably not dissimilar to me in that if you get a DVD of a film that you like, you enjoy having that, and we'll go back and watch certain scenes here and there.
Yeah.
But what you really like to dig into is the behind-the-scenes stuff. How did they do that?
Sure.
And I love the behind-the-scenes about Star Wars with Ben Burt. Mm-hmm. And how he did the sound design, mm-hmm. and how he decided that he could go out in the hills of California and strike a power line with a wrench or something, and it would make that blaster sound or something like that. And so as you're describing being out with this mobile recording rig, mm-hmm. and also having watched things and wondered, how do you mm-hmm. figure that out? It's a different sort of a thought process than a lot of other people go through, because you're just sort of letting the experience wash over them.
Right.
I'm the kind of guy that I'll go to Disney World and I'll move the garbage cans, and somebody that was with me would say, "What are you doing?" So, well, I'm curious. I haven't ever seen a full garbage can, but I haven't seen anyone empty it. So I wanted to see whether it was just going down into the ground. I had to know how it worked.
Right.
Sorry, a diversion from a
no,
diversion.
No, not at all.
There,
and in fact, on that thought, I mean, I've heard anyway, and not walked through the halls myself, but there's an entire underground city.
Yeah,
right,
that's what I heard too.
Right at Disney. No, I mean on the sound design piece as well, like. Hearing and discovering that, in most fight scenes, the sound of somebody kind of punching another person is actually, celery sticks being kind of beaten and crushed. Like that's the sound of crunching bones, is actually celery sticks getting beaten there. Like some, slippery, slimy, monster or something along those lines might be literally dog food kind of slurping out of a can. Like that's kind of the sound that they come up with. So it's infinite possibilities. So you're trying to recreate life and make it as realistic as possible. And sometimes you need to be creative and find what is the equivalent of that. Probably your ears are always on, listening for what could be. But yeah, Ben Burt obviously is a legend in the space. Yeah,
well, we could go and tell stories with that, but we're never going to get around to voices. So and I want to make sure that we do that. So let's go back to where you were, where you've got the mobile recording business. How did that evolve, and what was the next step?
I actually, when I graduated, as I said, I had that initial recording kind of rig. And the first kind of big step was finding a location. Actually, I realized I needed kind of home base here in the city. And as much as I wanted to go out to people, I realized that there's actually some people who didn't actually have a location. Bands were one thing, but independent musicians or singer-songwriters, they actually needed somewhere to come to. So I actually found a place downtown here above a restaurant. And I had a recording studio in the front bit of it, and a little kind of, loft apartment, if you will, in the back. So I lived and worked in the same space. And it was then, I have to tell the story about getting my name in the newspaper on my birthday. Was because the local newspaper picked up the story of the studio opening up and ran it. And what I didn't realize, though, is that Stephanie, who's now my wife and co-founder in the company, her mom actually cut out this newspaper article and left it for her on her bed. Because you see, Stephanie was a classically trained musician. She was a singer. She was a Western University music student. And she'd sing at weddings and funerals and special events. And her mom, I think, I'm convinced she was tired of carpooling her daughter around to go audition for people and get these gigs and so forth. And her mom saw the newspaper article and thought, well, why don't you go in and record a demo CD? And we're going back, of course, 10 years now, but go and get a demo CD done of your voice, sing some of your repertoire. So Stephanie came in, and we ended up we hit it off. We ended up doing that work together. But there was other small businesses in town that wanted a voiceover done. I didn't really kind of know what that was, to be honest. They said, hey, do you think you can record, have somebody record for our phone system, and we want a female voice. Well, I knew only Stephanie in the city. I didn't really know anybody else, and there was a hair salon that wanted some commercials done, and same deal. They wanted a lady to do this voiceover, and I called Stephanie and I said, do you think you can come down and read this page of copy? I didn't kind of coin it as, can you do a voiceover for me? I don't think neither of us even knew what that was, particularly. So we ended up doing that, and I should kind of insert in there that Stephanie likes to say it got romantic, which I think after we met each other, we ended up getting engaged and married within a year. And now as you know, we have 4 wonderful kids, and really kind of know nothing else other than working together and living and working together, and kind of eat, breathe, sleep, and kind of run this business. But it's been pretty much the same idea of what initially began as myself as the engineer and producer and editor, if you will, but myself as the engineer and Stephanie as the artist. We figured out how to do voiceover work, and so we slapped together a pretty brutal website. In fact, we went down to the local public library and took out web design for dummies, and we hacked together our own website from scratch. Like nowadays, there's WordPress and Weebly and Wix.com and all these things that you can literally point and click and make a website. But back then there was nothing. There's a hosting service. You'd sign up for $20 a month, and then that was kind of it. You got like login access, but whatever you wanted to, pages you wanted to build, there was no kind of editing tools like that. So we literally built the initial version of the website one page at a time, and taught ourselves everything through reading that book. And the site was really promoting the studio, and Stephanie is the one voice talent that was available. And it wasn't long before there were other talent from around North America, across North America, that wanted to be on the website. They discovered it somehow. Maybe we came up in Google or what have you, and there was a guy from California who did character voices and animated celebrity impressions as well too. And then there was a French fellow in Quebec who wanted to lend his voice, and we realized, hey, we're really onto something here. If we're doing this in London, Ontario, and doing kind of freelance voiceover work, and there's these other people contacting us from around North America, surely it's a pretty broad market. Why don't we get out of the production business ourselves and kind of reimagine this website into what has now become a marketplace, where we merely facilitate those kind of transactions, if you will, those engagements between the voice talent who are looking to promote themselves, right? Showcase their samples of their voice, describe what services they can provide, client list, and so forth, and then in turn make all of those profiles, if you will, available to those clients that might be looking to hire them. So it could be just like for us back in the day, from a small business, a hair salon or a floral shop, through to ad agencies and video production companies, and now some of the world's largest organizations use Voices.com to find a voice talent for whatever their project might be.
You touched on a lot of things. Boy, I could go down a number of different paths here. Well, but I'm going to just address when you talked about going to the library and signing out the, what did you say, web development for W's?
Yeah.
And this is a theme that keeps coming up with no matter who I talk to, is that if you're going to move forward and you want to try to figure out how to break new ground, learn something different, expand your horizons, is that you just get started. You jump out of the plane, and then you try to figure out how to open the chute on the way down. And I mentioned that. I wanted to point that part out of your story, and because I think it's going to happen again. Now you've got the concept. Now what do you do? But to just keep that forward momentum going, and then use the tools and resources that are available to you. The library. There's all sorts of information there, right? And then it translates into, or it morphs into the path sort of showing itself to you, which is what it sounds like to me is what happened with going through the day-to-day of trying to keep the lights on at the studio, and all of a sudden you're hearing from voice talent in California or other parts of the world, and then a light bulb goes off, right? But what was going on during that day-to-day while that process was taking place? What kind of work were you doing, and how long would you say did it take, David, from the time you did that first, even though you didn't know it was a voiceover at the time, voiceover, to where the two of you were kind of thinking, I think maybe there's a model here that we can apply?
Yeah, probably a year, at least a year anyway. I remember, in fact, we keep it just for memorabilia. I think our tax return for both of us combined was $13,000 that year, which I'm still curious, how do we even pay for anything, let alone feed at the time our two children. So we didn't make a lot of money. We might have had a client or two per month, which I think because when you're a sole proprietor, or in our case a small partnership, you're doing everything, right? I mean the prospecting to find new clients, then the kind of sales and service support, fulfillment, whatever that might look like, production, and then you're managing all the finances as well too. So not likely the most efficient operation, but I think it did give us both, Stephanie and I, the opportunity to kind of really understand the full kind of gamut of activities that needed to be done in running a business. We made and in fact that key word around being resourceful, that's I think the polite way of saying that we're cheap, but we're not cheap. We're just making use and tapping into the resources that we have available. And I think that there's lots of stories from us that I'm like, I always kind of question the initial price of something, or somebody puts out an estimate. What is that based off of? How is that built up? It goes back to that curiosity idea, right? Like let's dig a little bit deeper here. When we building the first version of the website, in fact, we did it ourselves, and we looked at having, believe it or not, IBM of all companies doing it back then, and it was going to be like $250,000. I mean, like, we made $13,000 the year before. $250,000, a $250,000 was just never going to happen for us, and that's when I'm like, okay, well, if I can pull this off, clearly we've built something of value, and that was, I think one of those experiences where you weigh, most endeavors, it's kind of a time cost analysis. How much of my time is it going to take to do this? Like, learn the skills and do it over and over, versus subcontracting or outsourcing it to someone else. When it comes time to, at least for me, replacing a hot water heater or a plumber, plumbing and doing plumbing, like, I'm never going to need to use that skill over and over. So therefore, it would be more appropriate that we work with a professional. I'm not going to have the license. I don't have the tools, the knowledge, right? It gets costly from that standpoint. But I felt with web development and trying to teach ourselves kind of enough to be dangerous, enough to kind of get by, that was, time and energy well invested, because we were going to be building ultimately what is a web technology and a web-based business.
How much of the architecture of what Voices.com was about to become did you and your wife have mapped out in your mind when you first started? Like even at that phase where you're looking to get submissions for a website and IBM's telling you it's going to be $250,000.
Oh, yeah.
How much of it did you already know that you were going to need? And
well, I think that even that process itself of kind of going to get these tendered offers or these bids on that kind of work, it forced us to articulate what it was that we were trying to build. What is the feature set? You said you need these profiles for these voice talent. What needs to be on the profile? Literally field by field. Do you want photos? Oh yeah, we're going to need a photo on the for the thing. Oh, you want to upload audio recording? Okay, how does that happen? Then when it came to the job postings, making a request for a voiceover, sounds like, oh, okay, I guess you might need a script, just attach that. But who are you looking for? The language, what language do they speak? The gender, the age range, the role that this voiceover is portraying. Are they, are they a cowboy? Are they a villain? Are they a wizard? Are they merely a narrator? Or are they a monster truck rally, voice? Like that is a role that's being performed. And then there's the style. Are they funny or are they sarcastic? Are they witty or are they serious? Right. And so even kind of articulating all of this on paper, to, in effect, you're creating like a software specification document, right? It's a list, if you will, it's kind of your wish list. And then I realized we're actually creating a specification document of what needs to be built. And so I think that was one of those exercises that we've learned, that the more kind of planning and dreaming in real terms, like on paper and documents, up front, it really crystallizes that vision that you might have in your head and makes it that much closer to being real, that whether you build it yourself or you have somebody else help you in building that, you're going to have that kind of great planning document at your disposal.
So how did you get it built?
We the first version is often what's referred to as an MVP, a minimally viable product, like the bare minimum that you can kind of get away with that looks suitable. And that worked for literally like another kind of year and a half. And every change, there was no database, there was no login and a system that people could edit their own profiles, as an example. And again, we're going back kind of 10, 11 years now. Every change that one of our voice talent members, because we got pretty quickly kind of a few dozen to, next thing you know, is a few hundred people. Every change they wanted to happen, they would literally have to send us an email and say, oh, I changed my address. Can you change what city I'm listed on? Or I've just landed a new client. Can you update my client list? And they were like little text changes. Yeah. And so we would literally have to do that one at a time. And we realized that's the first thing that needs to be built, is a way for our community of members to log in and make these changes on their own. We don't want to be doing, simple edits for the rest of our lives. So we ended up hiring a web developer to actually create that functionality, literally a database of our customers, of our voice talent, if you will, and a means for them to log in and edit their profile. That was like the first thing that was built. Then we extended that to a job posting kind of listing where the clients, in this case, the buyers, if you will, they would be posting a job of who they were looking for. So we needed almost like this submission process. You're either submitting a profile and creating it, or you're submitting jobs. Because and that version got built out. It was kind of done on an hourly basis, and then ultimately we ended up kind of stepping back and again, after, compressing, speaking of compressing time, compressing, years into minutes here, but we realized it just needed, a complete overhaul. It's like, if we were going to do this from scratch, how would we rebuild this? Still, there was we had most of it right, but it was just felt a little bit kind of cobbled together. So there was one point where we redid the whole thing. And that actually was still pretty much the foundation that we have today. So, we've kind of think of it as rebuilding the car. But the challenge is that the car is moving down the highway, right? So you're kind of rebuilding this car in motion, and you can't take it down into the shop for 4 weeks while you rebuild the thing. You got to do it as it's moving along. So now we're just kind of doing as like little modules at a time, as opposed to a total teardown and a rebuild.
That would make NASCAR races more interesting, don't you think?
It sure would, exactly.
The pit crews had to chase after the cars.
Exactly. They kind of ride in like, the equivalent, like the pilot cars going on beside them.
Yeah, that's not a good safety team suggestion with that. Was it, once that site was up and going, was it referred to as Voices.com right from the start?
Well, funny you ask. We originally started as Interactive Voices, which is a bit of a mouthful in and of itself. It was the best domain name I could register at the time, and Interactive Voices, though while everyone had their own profile, and we actually had really a fully kind of operational site, there were it really kind of pigeonholed us, if I may, that into like doing interactive media or new media, and it just was not a kind of a zippy brand. So around kind of 2007, 2008, there was all these new web companies coming online. Twitter and Flickr and Yahoo was rolling out all these new properties, and everything was kind of big, bright, and bubbly on the web. And so Stephanie and both, we really wanted to just kind of rebrand, come up with a new name, and I had put in a bid for Vox.com for $100,000, which I totally did not have $100,000, but I figured I'd determine how to come up with the money if we actually won this auction. But that didn't work out. We looked at Voxy and Voxio, and none of them were happening, and kind of went back to the drawing board and realized, well, what if we could just be, rather than a name change, like more of a name simplification, just drop this interactive bit. What if we could just be Voices.com? And I did what maybe many of the listeners would do, is you go to Google, you type it in, and you can do what's called a who is lookup, like a reverse lookup, to find out who owns the name, what's their email address, when does it expire, when was it registered, where is it hosted in the world. You can find all this information out. And it ended up being registered to this fellow in Colorado. And I thought, though, rather than me, David at Interactive Voices, reaching out to him by email and asking him would he sell his domain name, and if so, what price, that I would work through a third party, our lawyer, in fact. And so Phil sends this fellow an email and asks him would he sell the name, if so, what price. And he comes back and he says $50,000. I'm like, okay, well, this is half
for a domain name.
For a domain name, $50,000. It's not a website, or it's just the name, and you just really kind of transferring rights between your kind of registration accounts for these domain names. And but I figured it was half the price I was willing to pay. So, but still didn't have $50,000. So I went to everyone I knew and was clearly turned down. And then I went to the banks, and they're like, they almost had that same reaction, like, so are you building a new website? Or, is it? And I'm like, no. They're like, any new technology here? And I'm like, nope, just the name. And they're like, no, we can't get behind that. Like, and that's when actually Phil, our lawyer, taught us an important lesson, which was to really never take no for an answer. I mean, the good news is the fellow was willing to sell the name, and it was, up for grabs. It was just really kind of a matter of price. And so I figured I'd go back with a counteroffer and say, well, how about $30,000? But here's the thing: I'm going to pay you $5,000 every quarter for the next 6 quarters. So 5 times 6 is $30,000. So with that, he went for the deal. So for $5,000, which I think I foolishly cash advanced on a credit card or something horrendous you should never do, we were able to get ownership over this domain name, voices.com. And it was only over a weekend that we really relaunched the service. It was literally copying all the files from one server, think of it in one folder on your computer, into another folder. That was like pretty much as easy as it was. And then all future traffic of people that were trying to access the old website, it was like one of those mail redirects where you just kind of redirect all the traffic automatically. So even if they typed in interactive voices, they would automatically show up at voices.com. And people were thrilled. It was a name that, it was succinct, it was memorable, said what we did. It was one that they wanted to be part of. They saw that there was potential here, and I think it gave the impression that not only that we were much larger than we actually were, but that we'd been around forever. But I think it spoke to something bigger than we were currently at, and spoke to a really positive future.
I think you just answered part of what I was going to ask you next, which was how did you know that at that point that the name, the domain was going to make that much of a difference? It's a gamble either way.
Oh, for sure.
And there's a chunk missing that I'm hoping we can go back and fill in that's just before that point. But still, you were willing to pay $100,000 that you didn't have. And then you were willing to pay $50,000, which you didn't have. And you ended up paying $30,000, which you didn't have.
Which I didn't really
Although it
have,
sounds
yeah.
like, you only paid the $5 that you didn't have and then gave yourself a chance to catch up.
Exactly.
But how did you, if you're so sure of it that you're going to bankers and lawyers and over a name, over a domain, people that don't live in that world and understand how that all works, you must have had ample opportunity to doubt yourself. And then, well, maybe it's not that important. That is a lot of money for us. But how are you so sure?
Well, on that, it's funny because the name that was previously registered, I said, there was a site at the time. It was actually called Silencing the Critical Voices in Your Head. It was this medical journal from this, from the fellow who owned it. I think it was his sister that was a medical journal, and she was a psychologist, so she was writing about of various issues on that subject matter. So yeah, certainly there's doubt that creeps in, but there was this kind of mental model that was once shared with me when it comes to these big decisions of, do I move forward? Yes and no. You highlighted earlier that it really is a matter of, yes, you need to move forward, but how do you know if it's the right decision? And it's called the 10-10-10 model. And you got to ask yourself, is this the right decision? Am I going to be happy with this decision 10 minutes from now, 10 months from now, and 10 years from now? So if something might be tempting in the moment, 10 minutes from now, oh yeah, I think I can live with it. 10 months from now, oh, I might be regretting it. 10 years from now, my life could be in shambles, right? But if it's an opportunity, something like this, where 10 minutes from now, I'm probably going to be like, oh my goodness, now I'm really stressed. We've got to figure this thing out. 10 months from now, especially with this domain name, like those payments, we got the first payment done. We got the second. We're getting really hard to keep up with these payments of $5,000, but 10 years later, I look back. I mean, it hasn't been quite 10 years yet, but I look back and I still say that was the single biggest turning point in the evolution of the company, because it became the rallying points and the point of identity that now we've got a name that we can focus on. So that's the mental model that I use to filter out how am I going to feel about this decision 10 minutes, 10 months, and 10 years from now.
Here's the part that I think that I'd like to fill in with the story if you're willing to, because I think it's important for people that are listening and learning. Let's go back 10 minutes ago to where you were talking about wanting to get the original site built. That between you and your wife, you'd made $13,000 the year before. You got a quote from IBM for $250,000 just to build the platform that was going to eventually become Voices.com.
Right.
But even more immediately, Interactive Voices. As much as you're comfortable telling me, what was the jumping off point there that got you online and got that part of the business going? Like, in other words, you decided, I'm hearing, not to try to find $250,000 and go with IBM at that point. But what did you go with, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, I think, because we had that initial recording studio equipment, we actually, we had our first childs and then our second around that time. And we realized this whole kind of living and recording music in the same locale was not going to be very sustainable over the long run. And so we ended up really kind of scaling back. One of the first things to go was actually my drum set. I mean, there was nowhere to play drums, no reason to be playing drums. Then sold off this big keyboard, and we were kind of just left with literally the computer and microphones. So, how did we kind of self-fund? Well, we pretty much liquidated the studio equipment that we had. And all we were left with was a microphone and a computer. So we kind of made a go at that. The other thing that, that certainly comes to mind was that we continued to teach ourselves skills of the things that we knew we needed to do for, like, web design, web development, marketing on the internet. And as we did, we kind of gained more and more traction. And it was actually when it was that initial website that had, as I say, a few dozen people on it, we realized, well, let's, kind of do our first MVP. And the way we promoted that, actually, our initial version, if you will, was we wrote this long email newsletter type. It was not exactly a newsletter. It was just a long form email, and Stephanie messaged a couple hundred people and said, "Hey, here's what we're doing. We're already getting traffic to this website. We're launching a new one, and we're giving, it's going to have one purpose: to find you voiceover work." And explaining kind of our process and what we're going to do and how we believe that we could be successful. There was an ask at the end, and we said, for $49 for the year, we will market you online. And it was literally that simple. There was a link to a page on our website that kind of went into some other detail, and there was a link to the PayPal as well in the email and on this one web page that we had for the new site, which was Interactive Voices. And we did this on a Friday night. We woke up on the Saturday morning with $5,000 in our PayPal account. So we got 100 people for kind of that $50 for the year. And that's when we realized everything's always $5,000. $5,000, we realized that's the seed capital. That's what we had to, like, really go at it. We realized, well, we basically got ourselves some breathing room. We now need to go full force into delivering on that promise. We just told 100 people we were going to market them online and find them voiceover work. Now, how do we go make that happen? Which was learning about search engine optimization, writing how-tos and tutorials. This was the very first version of blogging was out. There was a company that Google owns now called Blogger, and Stephanie blogged for a year before even the first kind of comment. But she had so much knowledge of the space. I made hundreds, if not thousands, of phone calls. I mean, we just went at it, and when people started getting work, then they would tell their friends or talent that they worked with in their community, and then they would come online. So there's 3 ways that you can get capital or financing to start a company. There's the first way, which we did, which was through cash from customers or cash from literally selling something to your customers, which in my opinion is the best because you don't owe anything to anybody other than delivering on that service. The next up is, sure, you can borrow money, or some kind of creative financing, which we employed to actually get the domain name. We kind of, we made a deal, an arrangement where, yeah, sure, we borrowed money from the credit card up front to get that money. It's for the domain name, and then we had to earn it and pay back over the long run. And of course, there's other bank loans that we've acquired over the years and pay those down, and then get bigger bank loans and pay those down, and that cycle repeats. And then the last one would be those investors. And most people think, oh, technology company, is funded by investors. They put $500,000 or a couple $1 million in. And the trouble with that, though, is, yeah, sure, it gets you a lot of money up front, but they immediately own 40 or 50% of the company right off the bat. And a lot of the kind of scariest entrepreneurial stories that I hear of are from those founders who, after a round or two of financing, you burn through your first $2 million, and then you got to go back to the investors and say, now we need $5 million, and you get diluted. It means you get less and less of a percentage of ownership each time. And next thing you know, you literally, well, you may have been a founder, you don't own anything left in the company, like literally nothing. So we, Stephanie and I, have taken the approach of let's try to grow Voices.com by delivering an amazing service, something that actually people will pay for, and where we need to kind of supplement that and accelerate even faster, then we've borrowed from various banks. As I said, pay those down, generate a track record and a history that we would borrow more and pay that down, and as I say, just kind of repeat that cycle. So that's how we finance the company.
You're good at giving me a whole bunch of things that I want to follow up on. Time is going to make me choose. Mm-hmm. I could gladly ask you for a whole conversation on just how has the business association between you and your wife affected the relationship in the family, and we're not going to go down that rabbit hole, but the fact that you're all, and because I know you a little bit, I know that that's good, but that's a whole separate challenge I'd love to ask you about. I wanted to ask you about how did you choose $49, kind of because of what you had said earlier about where's the jumping off point for somebody that liked airplanes and Lego and then just wanted to be a drummer, to all of a sudden just acquiring this knowledge as you go about now dealing with investors and processes and loans and scale and all that. We could go off on all of these areas, but if it's okay, I'd like to take the few minutes that we've got left of your time and talk maybe a little bit more specifically about Voices and kind of what it has become versus what you just described. And unfortunately, we're going to have to skip over quite a little bit, but the scale of the workforce, how your days are different from back at that, because 10 years is not a very long time, David. It goes by like that, right?
For sure.
And but what is your life like now, as opposed to, and even the day-to-day of what happens in trying to run the company, as opposed to what it was like maybe after you just got that Voices domain?
Yeah, it's certainly different, and I need to, pause and recognize that. I think that's important, that the responsibilities that Stephanie and I both once had, which started literally on a piece of paper that we drew a line down the middle with each of our names at the top and said, here's what I'm going to do, and here's what you're going to do, and let's agree upon this right off the bat, to now, which are, formal job descriptions through the entire company, and that kind of and roles and responsibilities in departments. And this is all things that kind of evolved and scaled up to, which is now, there's 112 people that work at Voices.com right now, and those are full-time employees here in London. And we serve a community of, 250,000, users, if you will. There's 125,000 clients who want to work with those 125,000 voice talents. So, certainly a far cry from those humble beginnings. But we think there's a lot, more to go, and it's a big space, and it's an exciting space, and not only are we growing in it, but from what we can tell, the industry is growing as well too. So we think that's healthy. Day to day, it's you need to ask yourself, what is it that I need to do today? And there's a lot packed into that. It's not just what needs to be done, but understanding there are certain things that only I can do as the CEO of the company, and there are other activities or responsibilities that maybe multiple people can do. So I should really learn, and I've tried to develop the discipline, I should say, to let other people manage their areas of the business. And if you've hired great people, you should be able to trust them and empower them to make those decisions and run that group. And so, a lot of it is, my day-to-day is a couple pieces. I'm probably one of very few people who kind of bridges the gap between the internal operations and the external world, right? The internal world of the life and culture at Voices and the external world. And that could be through key client relationships. We talked about the investors and bankers, consultants, media opportunities, and future employees. These are all kind of external parties that kind of get a glimpse of what it's like at Voices. So Stephanie and I kind of bridge that gap, and that's kind of, again, it's another one of these like visuals, but that's kind of how we see our day-to-day going. And so practically, it's frankly kind of just packed with lots of meetings and lots of new people, and really telling, in some ways, truthfully, a lot of the same stories, and giving a glimpse of where we started, where we're at now, and where we hope to be in the future.
As opposed to picking a point in the distance and thinking, I want to get there, and then figuring out how to do it. How fair is it to suggest, David, that you and Stephanie have continued to drive forward, of course, but recognized potential opportunity as it's come along, and then chosen to pursue it, upgrade your knowledge and skills accordingly, and adjust as you go?
I think actually that being able to, I think that's an important skill to have, actually, being able to have a degree of intuition, to be able to spot an opportunity and have the willingness to like capitalize on that and seize it right in front of you. Expanding our office is a great one. When is it the right time to take on another 2,000 square feet or another 10,000 square feet? Because those are big commitments, because you're locked in for multiple years. So sometimes the opportunity comes up and you're like, if I don't take it now, it's gone and I'm going to be struggling. So there's an element of being confident in your ability to make decisions. So that's why I always encourage people to have a decision-making framework like I just described.
Sure.
And then make a lot of little decisions, because if you can make small decisions and feel great about them, when it comes to the big one, it's just another decision. Yeah, it's the bigger scale, bigger impact, but it's just another decision. And you go through evaluating alternatives and so forth, but you ultimately need to be able to live with that. I think there's, it's, no one has the crystal ball. You can't look out too far. We have big goals and ambitions, but I'd say it's a surprising amount of when something's kind of right in front of you and you just go for it, right? And just make the most of the tools and the technology and the resources and relationships that are that you surround yourself with, or you feel you have access to, and tap into those. And by doing that, you've almost created this just tremendous wave of momentum that isn't likely to slow down.
Did you ever get another drum set?
I haven't, and that's funny you bring that up, because my one of my daughters was asking. She's like, "Mom, we want to get a drum set for Dad. I think he'd really like to play drums again." So we'll see.
I absolutely loved hearing that again. I hope you enjoyed the conversation too, and are also now thinking about this within the context of your own journey. What's the thing that piques your curiosity the most? What's the possibility that you've always sensed is there, but have perhaps been hesitant to act upon? So what action, what one thing can you do right now to take a step forward? And how can you be more mindful of honoring and appreciating each step along the way? I think David gave us a lot of great material to think about that, as we all have our own journeys. I think it's really that simple. Take action, keep moving, Be decisive. If you'd like more examples of this process, here are some really good ones. Episode 31, Putting Creativity in Motion with Jeff Boudreau of Jeff's Musical Card. Jeff had the idea, as a lover of music, that he would convince original musicians, and some of very high profile, to sit in the back of his car and play a song for him acoustically while he drove them around town, and then did an interview with them, captured a video, and then shared that with the world on his YouTube channel called Jeff's Musical Car. Sound like an outlandish idea? Maybe, but Jeff's doing it. How? By applying the same formula you just heard from David Ciccarelli. Episode 34 is also a great example of moving forward and going with your gut. In fact, that's what it's called. Go with your gut, run your own race, with my friend Cole Perrin, who actually, at the time I'm recording this, he and his team in the NASCAR, what do they call it, Monster Energy Cup Series, the top level of NASCAR, just won another race in Watkins Glen, New York. Cole is the crew chief for, at this time, Martin Truex Jr.'s team. Cole is from a little town near where I live called Mount Bridges, Ontario. So how does a kid from Mount Bridges, Ontario, go to become the crew chief of one of the top teams at the top level in NASCAR? Listen to episode 34, and Cole tells you all about that journey. Episode 47, I think, is also a really interesting example of this, with a slightly different flavor. It's called Separation, Divorce, and Good Family Matters. Carl Good is the subject of that episode, and Carl tells a really interesting account of his journey, very much non-linear, and going through something that a lot of us, myself included, have been through, which is the dissolving of a relationship and eventually divorce, but having that come around to something redeeming in a way that he can use that heartbreak and the knowledge gained from that into something that will be of service to other people. Have a listen to that. It's quite a journey he's been living so far, and he's helping so many people because of it. That's episode 47. You can find those and all other archived episodes of Journeys with the No Schedule Man on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, or at noschedulemanpodcast.com. Please take a moment to subscribe, share, or leave a comment or rating or review. All of that stuff really helps, and I really would love to hear from you and know what you think. Also, keep in mind the weekly video block. It's called Footsteps. Those are all part of the larger journey. You can find those at youtube.com/noscheduleman or under the video blog tab at kevinbulmer.com. NoScheduleMan.com takes you to the same place. All my social media channel links are up there, as is the sign up for my Turtle Tribe via email. You can also learn more about my speaking, workshops, seminars, and coaching there. And if you feel any of those would be a good fit for your business or organization, I hope you'll pass the word along and get in touch with me personally. Whichever way you do it, I would love for you to join me on this journey and add your voice to mine. So please do say hello. I want to thank you again for taking some time to listen and share part of your day with me. I'm grateful. I hope you'll come back next week, and please do bring friends. All are welcome as we explore more journeys with the No Schedule Man.
Just a little deja vu.